Good morning, everyone. My name is Nadita Ramachala. I will be your host for today's public webinar. I would like to welcome all the participants to today's session, where we'll be speaking about driveway gates. So just to let you know that today's meeting is being recorded. And I would like to turn the session over to our Executive Director, Acton, Mr. Rodney Ramnath, to deliver the opening remarks. And before Rodney starts, I will just read out his bio. Rodney has a master's degree in project management and a BSc degree in industrial engineering, both from the University of the West Indies. He's also registered as a principal quality management systems auditor by the International Register of Certified Auditors. He has more than 15 years experience in quality management, auditing, and certification services, and he's well-versed in quality infrastructure and its mechanisms. So it is my pleasure to turn you over to our Acting Executive Director, Mr. Rodney Ramnath, to do his welcome and opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Nadita. Just doing a quick mic check to make sure that you can hear me.
Yes, confirming.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards public webinar on driveway gate safety, which is intended to promote the safety requirements of the National Standard for Driveway Gates. And this standard is TTS 641-2017, Driveway Gates Specification. We recognize and acknowledge the support of the University of the West Indies, Faculty of Engineering, and the Consumer Affairs Division, Ministry of Trade and Industry, who have partnered with us to host this webinar. Our objectives today are to highlight the key safety measures for driveway gates, provide an overview of the standards, and provide a forum for gate fabricators, installers, and property owners to provide feedback. And lastly, but not least, propose recommendations as to how the standard can be improved and utilized to improve driveway gate safety. As a nation, we have been very much saddened at recent tragic accidents caused by driveway gates. Based on media reports, we are aware of at least 12 fatal accidents involving driveway gates since 2011. Many of us have driveway gates. We build walls and gates to secure our property and loved ones. However, unlike a wall, a gate is designed to move. And if it can move, it is also possible that it can fall. When you realize that a typical steel gate can weigh as much as 900 kilograms or 1,900 pounds, you understand how much damage a falling gate can cause to the human body. As the national standards body, TTBS was established to develop, enforce, and promote standards to protect the public health, welfare, and safety. We view the ongoing loss of life caused by improperly designed or built driveway gates with serious concern. TTBS developed the standard TTS 641-2017 driveway gate specification following several fatal accidents in the early 2010s. And we have since been promoting its update and usage ever since. Our promotional activities have included television, newspaper, radio, and social media advertisements, along with stakeholder meetings to promote the adoption of the standard. This standard is voluntary, since TTBS is not a regulator for driveway gates. However, the standard can be used to guide fabricators, installers, property owners, and driveway gate regulators. Today, we will hear more about the salient safety features for driveway gates and how we can utilize the national standard to minimize the critical risks posed by driveway gates. This public webinar event is a continuation of our ongoing promotional activities, which we hope will ultimately result in improved safety of driveway gates and minimize fatalities. Your presence is important as we work together to address this problem. I appreciate your presence today and I look forward to your engagement and active contribution. Thanks. Back to you, Nalita.
Thank you, Rodney, for giving us that introduction to today's very important public webinar. So I will now go to the next agenda item, and this is to deal with the role and functions of TTBS. And please allow me one moment while I share my presentation. So everyone should be seeing my presentation now. And I know many of you all may be familiar with the operations of TTBS, but I will recap on some of the salient points, especially going into our standardization mandates. So TTBS is the national standards body according to the Standards Act number 18 of 1997, but we also have some of the key roles, including the National Quality Certifying Body, National Laboratory Accreditation Body, and under the Metrology Act number 18 of 2004, we are also the National Measurement Institute. Our line ministry is the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And our vision is to be the essential provider of national quality solutions leading to a standards conscious society that is globally competitive. To help us achieve this vision, we also have our mission statement to champion the development and implementation of standards, measurement systems, and conformity assessment services for competitiveness and the sustainability of Trinidad and Tobago. To help us fulfill this mandate at the TTBS, we have several different divisions with different responsibilities. I am from Standardization Division, and we're responsible for the development of national standards, but also the coordination of the national input in regional and international standardization. As I indicated, we also have metrology, and under the Metrology Division, we're responsible for industrial, scientific, and legal metrology, essentially looking at the accuracy of measurement systems across Trinidad and Tobago. We have some standards that are compulsory, and where these standards are compulsory, we have the mandate to enforce. And this is done primarily through our Implementation Division, where we look at imported products and inspections are conducted at the ports of entry and also within the retail trade, where market surveillance activities would be conducted. We also have the Certification Division being responsible for management system certification, product certification, including construction products like roofing sheets, liquid chlorine, bleach, cement, etc. And we also have a tourism certification program for the tour operators, tour guides, hotel accommodations, etc. Certification also has a critical role in the certification of locally manufactured products. So both our Implementation Division and our Certification Division have a regulatory function as well. To support our activities at TTBS and the wider stakeholder needs, we also have laboratory services in the areas of chemical, electrical, material, and fiber testing. I would now turn our attention to our standards-related mandate. According to the Standards Act number 18 of 1997, the Bureau shall promote and encourage the development and maintenance of standards. So we will hear about our driver gate standard, which is a critical tool that can be used to minimize risk and reduce fatalities. And we are happy to provide information to all stakeholders so that we can empower ourselves when we are purchasing, fabricating, constructing gates, that we are aware of the relevant safety features. And as Mr. Ramnath indicated, we have a very serious concern about the recent fatalities involving driveway gates, and we're hoping that through this public webinar that stakeholders would be more aware of the critical requirements. So for TTBS, we develop standards for the improvement of goods produced or used in Trinidad and Tobago to ensure industrial efficiency and development. And I am going to highlight the third aspect, to promote public and industrial welfare, health and safety. And our driveway gate standard directly falls under this bullet point. We also develop standards that support the protection of the environment. And for TTBS to conduct our activities and to ensure that we fulfill our standardization mandate, we participate in international standardization You may be familiar with ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, so commonly called ISO. So the ISO 9001 standard for quality management was issued by this body, and TTBS plays a critical role on the technical committee that would have formulated that standard and a number of standards in the area of quality. We also have another body called the International Electrotechnical Commission, and they are primarily responsible for standardization of electrical products. At the CARICOM level, we have what we call CROSSQ, the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, and we are active participants in the regional standardization process, and the intent here is to facilitate trade among our CARICOM member states. We also participate in COPANT, or the Pan-American Standards Commission, and they're responsible for regional standardization, sharing best practice across Latin America, North America, and the Caribbean. And of course, at the national level, we have TTBS being the national standards body. I know many of you all would be familiar with standards or standards issued by TTBS or even ISO standards. But to ensure that we have the concept of what a standard is, it is a technical document that provides an agreed upon repeatable way of doing something. And later we will have a presentation by Mr. Darrell Thompson on driveway gates. And this was a key aspect where we have certain criteria and requirements for the fabrication of gates. Standards provide a commonly accepted and repeatable way of defining the objective technical requirements of products. And when we use the term products, we mean both products that are goods, tangible goods, and services. And as I indicated previously, standards can be used to foster or facilitate trade, protect health and safety, preserve the environment, promote innovation, improve best practices through a lot of management system standards. Like, for example, ISO 9000, we also have ISO 14000 dealing with environmental management. And why standards? Standards are a part of our everyday life. So anything grown, produced, and traded is subject to standards. We have a wide portfolio of standards that have been declared as national standards, and a very large portfolio of international standards that can be used by stakeholders. At TTBS, based on our Standards Act, we develop two main types of standards. So I'll start off with compulsory first. And compulsory standards are issued when there is a significant health and safety issue or an environmental risk, or there's a need to protect the consumer. These requirements are legally enforceable by TTBS, and the compulsory status is conferred by the Minister of Trade and Industry, the Ministry of Trade and Industry being our line ministry. So these standards are effectively what we call technical regulations using the international trade language, and TTBS has a direct responsibility to enforce. On the other hand, we have standards that are voluntary, and they represent minimum levels of acceptability for a product or service. They are adopted at the discretion of business, and they are market-driven. So one example is our driveway gate standard that we're speaking about today, and this is voluntary. So TTBS does not have a direct role because we have not issued a compulsory standard, and therefore we encourage and support the use of the standard by stakeholders, and we are doing our public sensitization to increase awareness of the requirements. There is another category, and we will talk about that a little later on when I talk about the application of standards. But basically, TTBS would issue voluntary and compulsory standards. I would like to recap the standards development process. So we use a general process for standards development. It is based on what is the international best practice. So first, as standard, we have to get the need identified, and we use a methodology, and we'll talk about that a little later on. And it is called the National Standardization Strategy, where we would have consulted stakeholders and done a lot of data gathering and analysis to determine what would be the top standardization priorities for the country over a 3-year period. We also take stakeholder requests. So for example, if there's an urgent issue involving health, safety, consumer issues, We will assess the need, and once the project is accepted, we will conduct technical and market research. And here we would benchmark against international or foreign standards, as well as international and foreign regulations, develop a working draft. And then what we would do after that is establish a cross-section of stakeholders that would comprise a specification committee. The specification committee plays an advisory role to the TTBS, and we depend on volunteers, experts in the industry, but we strive to ensure a balance. And we do not want the committee to be biased in any particular direction. So we try to get input from manufacturers, importers, in the case of the gates, fabricators, the relevant ministries, any NGOs that may have an interest. So we try to get a broad-based participation of key stakeholders, and it varies from standard to standard. So we would conduct a stakeholder analysis to identify the key stakeholders that can participate in our committees and provide technical inputs into the development of the standards. After which, we have the specification committee coming up with a committee draft, and then we will go to public comment. Our public comment period is normally 60 days minimum, and this is where all stakeholders can submit comments to TTBS for review. After the comments are collected, we would issue the document for the specification committee to look at, and they will resolve the comments. We especially ask for technical justifications to be submitted because we want to ensure that we are taking the best technical solution to any particular problem or issue that is being faced. And during our public comment, we try to get a wide range of inputs. We do stakeholder consultations, we issue ads in the newspaper. We also heavily promote the documents on our social media and try to get as much input as possible. So once all the comments have been received and addressed by the specification committee, we have a process of internal approvals by our board of directors. Firstly, we have our technical and marketing committee, and this is a subcommittee of our board of directors. They would review the document and suggest any improvements, or basically give their approval or recommend to the board that the standard be declared. So our board of directors is directly responsible for declaring all national standards. Once the standard is completed, it would go to publication. Now, this is the process that we use for voluntary standards. However, for compulsory standards, as I indicated, the compulsory status is conferred by the Minister of Trade and Industry, so we have an additional step in the process for compulsory standards. I wanted to highlight some of the key principles in terms of good standardization practice. We like to ensure transparency, and these are international practices as well. Openness, impartiality, consensus. We use the term consensus to mean there's no sustained opposition to any technical requirements, and we ask for consensus within our specification committee. We have to ensure that the standards are effective and relevant, and there are also some international principles in terms of development dimension where developing countries can seek assistance from developed countries. Very similar to good policy making or developing regulations. So the key is transparency, efficiency, effectiveness, clarity, and equity. So just to highlight that standards support the regulatory process, we normally use standards to support the regulatory framework of either TTBS itself in the form of our compulsory standards or the regulatory framework of other agencies. For example, the Electrical Wiring Code is a voluntary standard for TTBS, but it is enforced by the Electrical Inspectorate, which is under the Ministry of Public Utilities. We also have some of the standards that are utilized in a similar way. We would have worked with the Ministry of Planning and Development, with the ozone unit in particular, to develop standards for refrigerant containers. And we are doing a refrigeration code as well. And this would support our national requirements to fulfill the Montreal Protocol. I would now turn your attention to the various ways that standards can be used. As I mentioned, standards that are compulsory support the TTBS as a regulatory mandate, primarily through the inspection schemes or product certification schemes. And again, this has to be linked to health, safety, environmental risk, consumer protection. So there has to be a justification for standards that are compulsory. And this is in alignment with the requirements of our Standards Act, as well as the World Trade Organization technical barriers to trade agreements. On the other hand, voluntary standards can be used by industry players. So you may be familiar with the very popular 9001 quality management system standards. We have more voluntary standards such as governance, and they are intended for stakeholders and they can be used as they provide best practice. We also have standards that facilitate third-party certification, and the management system standards fall under this category. As I indicated, the electrical wiring code is one example where a voluntary standard is incorporated into the regulatory scheme or mechanisms of other agencies. And standards in general that are voluntary can be referenced in national policies, in contracts, tender documents, procurement policies. They can also be used by testing bodies and certification bodies, as well as accreditation bodies, and accreditation specifically looking at the competence of labs, for example, medical labs and other types of general type labs, and also to support certification activities that may be related to products or personnel. So we have the entire gamut of voluntary standards serving a multitude of purposes and objectives that support the development of our country. I would have highlighted our national standardization strategy previously, but essentially it is the prioritized listing of standards to be developed by TTBS over a 3-year period. It is based on an international methodology from ISO. We would have looked at stakeholder input as well as statistical data for the country in areas such as GDP, export potential, and also where there are government policies. This document is available on our website. We are at the end of our first version of the National Standardization Strategy, and we will be collecting further data to move into the next 3-year cycle. So we value all inputs into this. So please take a look at the document and give us your suggestions and recommendations in terms of what are the new areas of standardization that we should continue participating in. For example, there are international developments related to sustainability and net zero, and also where we need to maintain standards and ensure that there's that continuity in terms of supporting the overall development of our country. We follow the international trends and the areas of standardization that are emerging. There's a heavy focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So a lot of standards at the international level would fall under the theme of sustainability. We have recently issued some standards for governance of organizations at the international level, and we are seeking to adopt those at the national level. We recently started some work on net zero and looking at guiding principles. So a lot of focus in terms of the environmental aspects, and also sustainable building materials. We are also looking at e-commerce and supporting digital transformation. So the concept of smart cities, as well as innovation management. So a lot of work is taking place at the international level. What we seek to do is to get the national feedback into these areas. We have a lot of work that is ongoing in terms of circular economy as well, so that we can bring the value of these international standards to the national level. So that is the end of my very brief presentation. I will stop sharing, and as we indicated earlier, if there are any questions, please put it in the chat and we have a question and answer session later on. I would now like to turn the session over to Mr. Daryl Thompson. He will be giving us an overview of the Driveway Gate Standard TTS 641-2017. And before Daryl starts his presentation, I will just give you his brief bio. Daryl is currently employed as a standards officer at the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, and he has been involved in standardization work for the last 19 years. His portfolio is very extensive and he has responsibility for building codes, construction product standards, and standards similar to driveway gates. He has served as technical secretary to committees which have developed standards for cement, hollow clay blocks, concrete blocks, and steel bars. And he was directly responsible for the project on developing the driveway gate standards. So he has a lot of knowledge and technical expertise in this area. He has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of the West Indies and has received international training on standardization and quality assurance from the Bureau of Indian Standards. So I'd like to turn the session over to Daryl, and he will give us some of the key safety aspects of the standard.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm going to start sharing. Can you confirm that you see my presentation?
Daryl, yes, we can see the presentation, but if you could click slideshow, please.
Okay. All right, is this good now?
Daryl, it is now in presenter view. So if you could end the slideshow and just do the normal slideshow using the tool at the end.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you again for participating in this public webinar on driveway gate safety. So this is a brief overview of my presentation this morning. I will discuss the background to the standard, explain what the standard covers in scope. We will look at how the standard is arranged and laid out. We would quickly cover some of the key requirements of the standard and look at some of the additional information in the annexes. So we know that driveway gates can be dangerous because one, they can be unsafe. As the executive director mentioned, a typical gate can be about 900 kilograms, generally made from steel. And when that falls on someone, it can cause a lot of damage and injury. They are almost universally used. Many homes and businesses have a driveway gate, and people generally would build one to protect their home or their business from property. At this time, there's no regulation for the driveway gate construction and installation, and as a result, anything goes. And the upside of this is that you have a situation where there are a lot of accidents involving driveway gates, and as indicated, we know of at least 12 fatalities within the last 10 years or so. So the standard was requested by UWI in 2015, and there was a high incidence of gate accidents in that period between 2011 and 16. There were about 10 fatalities. And the request was to develop a standard to provide guidance to homeowners and fabricators to make gates safer. So as Nadita would have pointed out, we first step in setting up a standard is to develop a committee. And the committee included stakeholders from various organizations and interest groups, including vocational training bodies, academia. We had 2 installers and fabricators and several state agencies involved. We also reviewed several international standards from the United States, from Europe, and we use the information from these standards to develop our national standard. So the scope covers, it covers what the standard applies to, what types of gates are addressed, what requirements are specified, and also what is not in the standard. So the standard covers metal driver gates used to control vehicle access to premises. It specifically applies to automated and manually operated gates, horizontal sliding gates, and horizontal swing gates up to a span of 9.1 meters or 30 feet. And it specifies requirements for the design, fabrication, installation, and minimum safety features. However, the standard does not cover the following types of gates, such as gates for pedestrian use, roller, bifold or multifold. I'd just like to remind everybody to mute their mics, please. This is going on. So these are the types of gates that the standard doesn't cover. Security barriers for controlling vehicle access and standard gates on a sloping track. So now going into the structure and arrangement of the standard. So this is this table of contents. The first part that is highlighted in red contains the requirements for the design and construction of driver gates. The part that is in green includes additional information that's been put in informative annexes, given construction guidelines and tips. So this is the structure of the standard. At the top, we have main heading subject area, driver gates, and it's broken down into requirements for the design and construction of sliding and swing gates. We have another section for automated gates, terms and definitions, and marking and labeling requirements. And this is the same view in a little more detail with so clause 4 deals with common requirements for sliding and swing gates, and there are specific requirements for the components, fabrication, finish, gate leaves, etc. And we'll go into a little more detail later on. So this is an image illustration of a gate with the key components labeled and the clause references showing where they are addressed in the standard. And this is again showing a similar view, but the areas in red are the critical safety features, which should be addressed by the presentation by Mr. Bansi following mine. So the standard defines several terms and definitions related to driver gates, which are listed in this slide. And there's particular terms that are important to define, such as what a driver gate is. And basically, it's a barrier extending across the width of a driveway, which primarily controls vehicle access to a property. We also define manually operating and automatic gates. And the key difference is that the movement of the gate leaf is manually powered. And we also define sliding and swing gates. A sliding gate is fitted with casters, which moves horizontally along a track, whereas a swing gate is mounted on hinges and swings in a horizontal arc. Some additional important definitions. So the gate leaf is the portion of the gate that opens and closes. The frame is the members connected to each other, which forms the primary unit of the gate leaf. However, the gate leaf and the frame are not the same, because the gate leaf will also include additional components such as the rollers for the allow movement on the ground, as well as perhaps a latch or locking mechanism at the end, which would not be considered part of the frame. The gate post is a post including a mechanism to support the gate or receive the gate leaf in the closed position. And safety post is a post that is separate from the gate post and is installed to support and prevent the toppling of the gate leaf in the event that it becomes detached from supporting mechanisms. So now going into the requirements of the standards. So clause 4 contains common requirements for both sliding and swing gates. And there are 4 subsections dealing with components, fabrication and finish, gate leaves and gate posts. And the arrows show the specific areas that are covered by each of these. So for instance, the gate leaves, there are requirements for the frame construction, the requirement for horizontal stiffener across the gate leaf, and requirements for the minimum leaf length. Clause 5 deals with sliding gates specifically, and it covers tracks, casters, the guide assembly, stops, keepers and latches, safety posts, and safety brackets. And the illustration here shows the labels, the various components that are covered under clause 5. And so the requirements for the tracks, for instance, cover the track material, the location and mounting, the type of guard. The requirements for the casters include the design of the casters, the span and installation, etc. Similarly, for the stops, there are requirements for the location, the strength and rigidity of the stops, how it should be mounted, and the need for corrosion protection. And on the safety posts and safety brackets, the standard defines requirements for the location of these elements, the materials and construction and fabrication of them. When on to swing gates, so the specific requirements that apply to swing gates will be for hinges and stops, keepers, and latches. And for hinges, the requirements for the strength and durability, corrosion attachment, and how it should be attached. And stops, keepers, and latches is requirements for water penetration and corrosion protection. The standard also applies to automated gates, and there are safety issues related to automated gates. So standards specifies requirements to prevent gate overrun, crushing, to allow safe manual operation, and to prevent entrapment. So the graph on the right shows one of the mechanisms used to prevent entrapment, which is called an inherent system. The lower graph shows the normal operation of the gate, but there's an allowance in terms of the maximum torque, and if it exceeds this maximum torque, the gate stops. So where there's an obstacle, the gate motor will try to exceed the maximum torque, and it will stop it automatically. We also included marking and labeling requirements to allow the homeowner or anybody to verify certain information if that was important. So this includes the name of and trademark of the manufacturer and installer of the gate, the installer's address and contact information, the year of installation. And the last one, inspection approval or certification, was done in anticipation of a inspection program or fabricator qualification program. This is not in place at this time, but we hope that something like that will be developed in the future. So this captures this first part here deals with the requirements of the standard. I'm now going on to the informative annexes. So these are not requirements, but are provided for information, and we provide construction guidelines for the following, for specific gate components, and for instance, the gate, additional information on how to fabricate the gate leaf, what type of material to use, how it should be, things like the gate posts, where they should be located, again, how they should be mounted and secured. So the annexes A to C cover these aspects here. Annex E contains inspection and maintenance checklists. So there are inspection guidelines for the gate leaf, the guide rollers, and the field safe features, as well as the gate trap. As well as the gate trap. So, as I close, just like to remind everyone that the standard is available from the TDBS Standards Information Center as either PDF open copy. The cost is $136 plus VAT, and you can obtain it by contacting TDBS at this contact information here. So the next presentation will deal with the key safety features, which I've highlighted in red in this overview of the standard. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll be available for questions during the open forum. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren, for the presentation and highlighting the key elements of the standard. I would now like to turn the session over to the next presentation. It is the key safety features for driveway gates, and this presentation will be done by Mr. Jainaran Bansi, University of the West Indies, Faculty of Engineering. Mr. Bansi has acquired over 20 years of diversified industrial experience in the process and manufacturing environment, and has served for over 15 years as a faculty member. He has also delivered over 1250 hours of professional education for various local and multinational organizations. He has also lectured for 10 years part-time at a senior secondary school. He holds qualifications in mechanical engineering, production engineering and management, manufacturing engineering and business administration. He also holds professional membership in the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, the Association of Professional Engineers of Trinidad and Tobago, APET, and the Association of Business Executives, ABE. He has been engaged in a number of voluntary services that have extended to various committees and associations. And I should mention that he also chaired this particular committee for driveway gates. He is a development engineer at the University of the West Indies, chair of the IMEC Pan-Caribbean Group, and immediate past president of APET. He is results-driven, self-motivated, and creative with excellent team building skills, and takes initiative to get the job done in a proactive environment. So based on that, overview of Mr. Bansi, he's well qualified to give you some more insight into the driveway gates issue and how we could improve the safety, overall safety requirements. So Mr. Bansi, I turn the session over to you.
Good morning, all.
Good morning. Mr. Bansi, can you switch to the other slide view? Right now we are seeing it in presenter. So yes, you're good now.
Okay then. Good morning to all. My name is Jainaran Bansi, and with your permission, allow me a few minutes of your valuable time as I expound on a few of the safety features, the details of which are found in the standard. So the outline of my presentation is pre-2017. Some safety features of the standard post-2017, and emphasis on 3 safety features from the standard with a conclusion. So what we had pre-2017, the short video captures it. So we have a gate automatic without any support, and you realize it falls down. Pre-2017 again. Emphasis on viewing the gate, the actual gate. If you notice where it pops off, because there was no stop. So we had falling gate skilling in 2011, it also in 2015. What we did collectively brought about a standard in 2017 with certain safety features, among others, stop safety, post safety brackets. Post 2017, we are talking 2022. Girl crushed to death. Boy killed by, again, this is July 2022. Regarding July 2022. And this was a near miss. So we had these incidents, and as Darrell had indicated, over the period of time, a number of people had died. We brought about the standard collectively with stakeholders' involvement. And yet 5 years after, we are still having the same problem. Why? We must ask ourselves why. One of the key safety features we brought about was the gate stop. It is to prevent the gate from moving beyond a certain point, be it closed or open position. The stop prevents the sliding gate from moving past its support and toppling over. Typical specification for its fabrication is 25 mils wide. To form a triangular shape as was shown before and welded to the track. At both the fully open position and closed position to prevent, as we mentioned, further unintended travel. It was mentioned based on the weight of the gate, you require certain force and momentum will allow it to move. You need something to stop it. Safety post. As the caption shows, there's a post to prevent the gate, which props up and prevent the gate from falling and causing damage to life and property in that order. It must be fabricated, should extend at least half the height of the gate and constructed from steel or concrete, but critically it must be able to withstand the weight of the gate. Secure it cast into the ground at least 2 feet. So typically your wall is 6 feet. So a third of it is 2 feet minimum. And as close as possible to the gate. So the same one we had earlier. That is the purpose of the safety post. The bracket, it's additional to the safety post, but we prefer you have a post. And redundancy and safety, you can also put that as a backup measure. Bracket should overhang the leaf of the gate for a distance of at least 4 inches. We're talking about this depth here. At least avoiding a space from the top of the gate beneath the bracket. Location. Bracket should be securely mounted, preferable to a column on the adjoining wall as shown in this caption. So, in my brief presentation, I would have highlighted the stops, the posts, and the bracket. In addition to that, you must have maintenance check. And a key thing is that you must have a competent person to design, fabricate, install, and maintain your gate. So as this
The following is intended to address the need for greater safety in the design, construction, and installation of manual and automatic sliding gates. 1. Install a safety post. A safety post prevents falling or toppling if the gate comes off its track. 2. Check your safety stop. A safety stop prevents the gate traveling past its fully open position, which can result in falling or toppling. 3. Conduct regular checks on your gate to ensure it rolls or slides smoothly. For further information, check the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards website at www.gottbs.com or call 662-8827.
So there's a flyer on TTBS website, and together, as Darrell mentioned, standards. And thank you for listening, and any questions will be entertained subsequently in Q&A session. Thanks. Back to you, Darrell.
Thank you, Mr. Bansi. So I will now go to the next session on contractor engagement, and this presentation will be done by Mr. Johannes Risbrook from the Consumer Affairs Division from the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And before Mr. Risbrook starts his presentation, I will just give you an overview of his bio. And in the meantime, he can share his presentation. He's currently employed at the Ministry of Trade and Industry as an acting consumer advocate 1 for the past 2 years. He has a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of New Brunswick. His portfolio includes receiving and investigating consumer complaints with the aim of resolving them and fostering a fruitful economic environment in Trinidad and Tobago. He also conducts consumer education programs such as lectures and outreach programs geared towards educating the public about their rights, roles, and responsibilities. So we are very grateful for this presentation. And I think it would add a lot of information as in terms of what the normal homeowner can do to improve gate safety. So thank you, Mr. Risbrook, for the presentation, and I turn the session over to you.
Can you give me 1 minute, please? I do apologize.
No problem. Mr. Risbrook, while we wait on your presentation, I'm going to launch a poll so that we can get some feedback from the participants. So if all the participants could respond to our very simple poll, we'd just like to get a sense of the audience here with us today.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay,
Are you ready?
yeah, my last report I had applied
my slideshow.
last week. For next week.
Yeah,
From the 2nd to the
Okay.
5th, right?
Hi, morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, Ms. Rosbeck. You can go ahead. And we'll just ask that persons who are not presenting to just unmute.
To remain
Thank you,
muted.
Mr. Rosbeck. Go
I
ahead.
do apologize about that. Ran into a little problem with the print. But all right, so this morning I'm just here to present quickly on the handyman's, this is blocking me, handyman service contract, which is a contract developed, a template developed by the Consumer Affairs Division. It was brought about through rising, let's say, receiving of complaints of this nature, where you would hire a person to contract them to do works at your home or business, whatever the case may be, and the work was not properly done. So coming out of that in 2002, they developed this handyman service contract. Right, so it's always good to note that when hiring someone to provide services, including plumbing, electrical installation, carpentry, car repairs, or anything, but in light of today's topic, which would be the driveway gates, this contract would be quite applicable. Right, so I have it up here, but I'll go through it on a different document so that we could see an example of how to fill it out. It seeks to cover the terms and conditions of the job that needs to be done, the contract period. It also has a section where it allows for variations, as you can see here, variations of the contract, and also the responsibilities of both the consumer and the contractor. So at this time, I'll try to share the template. All right, so you're seeing a Word document on the screen now.
Yes.
I'll try to just expand it a little. All right, so in the contract, you'll see it's professionally laid out, but anybody could use it. So from here, you get to see that the standard template for the beginning of any contract, this agreement, this agreement signed on this date, so you'll put in the date, you put the names of the two parties, addresses, everything like that, client, contractor, and throughout the contract you'd use those same terms to identify who has to do what. You have section 1, which is the terms and conditions. As you can see here, the client agrees to pay the contractor a total sum of X amount, and you break it into how the payment will be done. You also have a breakdown of the contract period, duration of works, 3 weeks, commencement date, completion date. Also, the variations, this is just terms that you'll agree to, stating that the client reserves the right to vary. And you could read more in depth because we have the template available for everyone online. So we also look at it, we also cover subcontracting. There's a section for materials, and it will depend on the job, is what you would have to input. Together with termination of contract, that's an important section to have in any contract. Effect of termination for compensation. All these things seek to cover all the areas that regular person, the everyday layman, may not cover in an oral agreement. So whereas you might agree with the contractor verbally to say, yeah, I would like you to do this job at this price, and then he comes later on and says, nah, I can't do it for that price anymore, is this price is increased. If you have the contract laid out and both parties signed, and you will also see here that we have a section for the contractor to sign, also for the client to sign, together with a witness. So we have three signatures on the document. You also have a schedule laid out for when the work should be completed. Well, at what needs to be done and when it should be done. You could put it as detailed as possibly as your heart desires. And also at the end, you have variations. So like, let's say the contract period already began and something came up. You decided you don't want the man to just do the gate anymore. You want him to also install the electric motor or the automatic gate motor or to tile your driveway. You never know. You get to add that at the bottom. One consideration, well, one limitation of the contract, it must be under $50,000. Well, the maximum cost covered on this contract is $50,000. So you keep that in mind when you're taking any jobs or you're using this for any particular job. Just keep in mind that the maximum value could be $50,000. All right, so you could, this link, the animal service contract can be found at this link. I could copy it and put it in the chat. Well, I believe I could do that. And you could also find more information about us on Facebook. You could email us any of your concerns at consumeraffairs@gov.tt or call our toll-free hotline 800-4277. All right, and that's that for me today.
Thank you, Mr. Risberg, for giving us that overview of a contract document that can be used by, the small homeowner for the type of gate fabrication that might be necessary. So I would now like to go into the open forum, and this is where questions and answers will be entertained, and we invite the participants, so you all can raise your hand and we will let you unmute so that you can raise your questions. Now, I'm already seeing some questions in the chat, so I will start off with one question that came in already, and it really is about, does the Bureau have a list of fabricators available to the public qualified to install gates according to the required safety standards? So I would like to invite Daryl and Mr. Bansi to comment on that. But before they respond, in terms of TTBS's role for this particular standard, it is a voluntary standard. And one of the issues that we are looking at right now is how this particular standard can be used in a regulatory way. And if that is done, then we do not have a system at this point, similar to, say, the Electrical Inspectorate, where there is a licensing system for wiremen. And that is one of the discussion items we would like to have with the key government agencies in moving forward. So I have a couple of hands up, but I would like to turn this question over to Daryl as well as Mr. Bansi to give some comments around this issue as well.
Thank you, Nadita. So, quick answer to the question is no, at this time there isn't any list of qualified or approved fabricators. And as Nadita has mentioned, we have had discussions with government agencies to see how we could formulate a holistic framework for enforcement, which may include some sort of licensing or certification of fabricators.
Thank you, Daryl. Mr. Bansi, did you want to comment here as well?
Yes. And the last stakeholders, when we had, it was put forward that our, as you had mentioned, TTBS would not be biased on identifying contractor A, B, or C, but it's the competence which you need from such person if you are guided by the standard. And you can ask the persons for certain certification. Our intention, as Darren had mentioned, it was to have some sort of license certification out of the training bodies, for instance, NTA. So you may not necessarily ask someone with a BSc to do the welding aspect of it, but you may ask someone with a BSc to do the design and another person do the welding aspect. So it was a work in progress, as with other state agencies, to have that. But in the conclusion, we did not want to put up a list to be biased towards any particular contractor. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Bansi. So I have a couple of hands up. So I believe we have Lynette. Lynette, can you go first and then we will go to Samuel?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My question is there a system in place where one can have an inspector of the gate to come and give you advice on the gate that you already have up? Thank you.
Thanks, Lynette. That is a very good question. And, again, going to the fact that it is a voluntary standard for TTBS, we are having the discussions with the relevant key agencies to determine what type of requirements or what type of regulatory systems can be put in place. And part of that will also look at the possibility of inspections. But at this time, there's no government agency per se to say that they have a list of inspectors. So it is something that we are looking at in terms of how the standard can be used. So thank you for that comment and question.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
okay, so I will now go to Samuel. You can unmute.
Yes, morning. I'm not sure, I may have missed a little part there, but Mr. Risbrook spoke about the handyman contracts being a maximum of $50,000. I just wanted to know whether or not that 50,000 specific for that contract, or could it be 55,000, 60,000, you know what I mean? Or is it that this is a specific thing for handyman contracts?
Thanks, Samuel, for that question. Mr. Risbrook, you go ahead.
Yeah, all right, Mr. Colley, what's going on is that to have that contract be legally binding or something that you could stand up in court, we have it limited to $50,000, so that if you do have a job valued at $60,000, I would suggest that you split it. You probably do 35 for the supply of materials and whatever, and do the remainder on a separate contract. So you're splitting it into 2 contracts. That's just to safeguard and prevent, due to the limitations of the value that could be on it.
So, okay, so it's a legal thing then with handyman contracts?
Because once you have that contract signed off by the 2 parties and the witness, you could just take that contract to the petty civil court. If any shortfalls or shortcomings are found, well, I don't want to say found out, like if anything comes up afterwards where you're not satisfied, or the supplier didn't do what he signed off doing or what he was contracted to do, you could just take it to the petty civil court and it will stand up as a legally binding contract.
Okay, I think I catch where you're coming from. I think I understand. All right, thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Samuel, for that question. So I'm not seeing any new hands up. Lynette, you still have your hand up. Did you want to ask another question?
No, I think that was a mistake. That name didn't come up. Thanks.
Okay.
There is
And
a comment on the chat there from
yes,
some.
so I'm going to, so there are a couple of comments in the chat, and I will, so there are some ones that I can respond to immediately. And so the question from Mr. Ali, can participants receive a copy of the standard? And the response there is that TTBS, we offer standards for sale in general. Our compulsory standards are normally free as we move forward to make it compulsory standards available as they are considered technical regulations. What we have in this instance is that we have some flyers and some information guidance that is freely available and covers the main points. But if this particular standard is required, it would have to be purchased from the TTBS at this time. And I will go into one of the other questions, and it says, while it is noted that TTBS is a standardization body and not so much an enforcement body in gate safety, how can TTBS push or lobby for the gate standard to be included in the National Building Code to be enforced rather than be voluntary? Would this require a call or rally from the public? What can be done other than the publishing of a standard? Who now would go and inspect gates? Is it only after an unfortunate event can a person be held legally accountable for any injuries? So a number of issues are being raised here. I would just say from the TTBS side, we are in discussions with the relevant ministries with regard to the application of the gate standard. And also we are engaged in discussions in terms of the development of a national building code. I think it always helps if persons show their support for such initiatives. And what can be done other than the publishing of the standard? What we have decided as TTBS is that we would engage in public sensitization because we want to empower the normal homeowner with the information that they need. And also we have raised awareness of the standard. But of course, we understand that a lot more is required in terms of having the regulatory systems in place.
Good morning, what?
Mr. Mahabal, do you have a question?
No, thanks.
Okay, if you're okay, I'm going to mute you for now. And you can raise your hand if you have any queries. So, Mr. Bansi, do you want to comment on this particular issue?
Yes, I will just say it is not a mandatory standard. And yes, we had reached out in discussion with other state agencies. And while the process was going on, we had decided to make this voluntary standard while the government agencies decide who want to regulate it. We couldn't wait for that process because we would have probably been here 2022 without even a voluntary standard. But what I want to emphasize on, we as society have to have a cultural shift in our mindset that this involves life and limb and your asset, your property. So regardless if it is compulsory or voluntarily, you have to be able to mitigate the risks which are associated with installing the gate or even burglar-proofing in your house and make that shift. So no one should be coming with you with a big stick and saying, need to do that. Yes, I agree. And remember, this is on the residential side, not on the industrial or commercial side. But we have to make that shift collectively. And I know we had done that in some marketing program. For instance, we had suggested when HDC is bringing out a homes development, that flyers will be there, because most of the time when they're building those development, there's no perimeter fence or so. And it was there because sometimes you build a house and 10 years after, then you're seeing about a gate. So the question is, will you wait till someone get certify with the gate being approved before it could go into their home. So because of those little obstacles, we said let the voluntary standard move forward. But it is good, as someone said, we have the labels on the gate, who manufactured, when it was last inspected, and you be proactive and call someone with the competence to deal with that. Some earlier in the chat they said if there's an inspector, well, it is not like TNTech where you must have a licensed inspector to come and approve before you get connection. In this instance, there's no inspector. So you have to look at the competence and be guided by the standards. Remember, the standard is the minimum requirement. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Bansi. So there are a couple more comments and queries in the chat. And one question was, can OSHA be the regulatory agent for inspection of the gates when they're doing their inspection? And one of our participants would have responded, and the OSHA agency can only regulate within the framework of work, not public. I think this inspection would fall under the regional corporations or Ministry of Works and Transport and their building inspectors. Again, this is a call to the National Building Code. I stand to be corrected. And Mr. Bansi, do you want to comment on that?
Well, it can be as an appendix, as I said, but it is not the main structure of the building. It is a perimeter fence, and it can be incorporated, but I prefer it probably stands on its own, an independent standard, and you pass, you approve, you're moving into your house. But then the question is, how can you decertify someone now if they put up a gate? Those are the challenges, as you mentioned, in the regional corporation, the fire inspector divisions, need to come and say. And the challenge we had is, who's going to take responsibility for it? It can be incorporated, nothing wrong as an appendix to it, but it can stand on its own. But again,
Thanks, Mr.
again, it is based on collectively, as we said, we are open. We are not saying a cast in concrete. There's always continuous improvement. So yes, the standard can improve in certain aspects of it. I guess this is why we have this webinar, and we have free submit your comments, and it will be guided accordingly. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Bansi. I'm just going to another question here. With respect to the maintenance of gates installed, is it required to have specific contracted personnel conduct maintenance checks, or can the homeowner or business owner select anyone to perform the maintenance checks?
Well, the standard was there for guidance for the homeowner. And if you work into a handyman contract and you, with your contractor, say that out as a minimum within one of the clause, scope of work, as a minimum, you have to follow the guidance. That is sufficient there. But being proactive, you can make yourself aware of some of these the safety, and in fact, all the safety features from the standard, and you can be your own inspector. If you are not satisfied, you have to get a third party, because the fabricator and the installer will say, well, I did it according to standards. Who's going to check him for QC purposes, quality control purposes? So if you have the skill set, the homeowner, you can monitor it. Or if you feel unsafe and you want to get a component person, you can reach out to the individuals or organization with the competence for that.
Thanks, Mr. Bansi. In terms of, Daryl, did you want to comment as well? Maybe you could pull up the flyer, the e-flyer that we have.
Yeah, I'll put it up, but while I'm looking for it, I just wanted to also mention that, and I would have covered this in the presentation, that the standard includes a inspection checklist. So much of those things can be easily verifiable. It's and can be done by the layperson without any specialized knowledge in fabrication or welding. Where I would suggest some caution is for the electrical components for an automatic gate, that be left to a competent electrician. But the safety aspects which we would have identified in the flyer can be easily verified by anyone.
Thanks, Daryl. So there's another comment.
We didn't say we have 49 participants, and if we can get some more comments, would be appreciated. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, we have another comment. What roadmap will you follow to move the standard from here to a mandatory requirement? Are you not encouraging deliberate non-conformance by the TTBS not identifying a fixed period for making this mandatory? And thank you, Dr. Narayan, for this question. But let us go and recap again. The responsibility that TTBS has for compulsory standards, we are mainly focused on products which are traded. In the instance of gate fabrication, it is under the wider purview of the National Building Code issue. So it is not that TTBS is encouraging deliberate non-conformance. What we're doing is providing a voluntary standard which has guidelines which can be utilized by gate fabricators or the homeowners themselves to make a demand of the relevant safety requirements. But at this time, TTBS is working with the agencies who have the more direct mandate for overall building safety. So TTBS does not conduct, say, building inspections, and the gate being part of the overall system. As I indicated before, the TTBS, we would work with the relevant regulatory agencies who have that direct mandate. And we are in discussions with the relevant parties to determine what can be done for a more direct regulatory rule. So again, I'm making the distinction between TTBS's role as a regulator, where we have a number of standards that are compulsory and that we enforce, versus our role with respect to the development of codes which are to be enforced by other agencies. And I'm certain that, you know, some of the answers may not fully satisfy all the concerns that we have, but let me assure you that TTBS is fulfilling its mandate as a national standards body, and we are in discussions with the key agencies. Mr. Bansi, did you also want to comment on that very critical question that was raised by Ms. Dr. Narayan?
I think you would have covered it there, given the limitations of your organization, but notwithstanding that, you are still engaging other government agencies.
So Daryl, if you just want to increase the size of the image, and while you're doing that, there's a question that I'd like to read out for both you and Mr. Bansi. Do these gates have to be a certain weight for safety reasons, or does the weight of the gate not matter?
The weight of the gate does not matter because we did not want to stifle innovation of the fabricator. But what we are saying that the post should be able to withstand the force which emanating from the gate in case it tilt. The foundation of the track must be able to withstand the weight of the gate. The stops must be able to withstand that weight plus per momentum. So we are saying these are the guidelines you have. We did stipulate that how the depth in the foundation for the bearing of the safety post should be at least a third of the height. So in that aspect, you are being guided, because if someone used, let's just say, 1-inch pipe to fabricate a gate, we would not design the foundation to hold a 2-inch pipe structured gate. So it must be the critical things there. The stop, the safety post, and the bracket must be able, whatever gate, shape, fashion you design your gate, right, should be able to withstand that. Darrell, you may be able to add anything to that.
So I agree with what Jan Rang mentioned. In developing the standard, we had to consider what would cover the most typical or type of gate. And I'm sure we would have seen in some properties very large gates, and that would probably exceed the weight that we had projected. So the recommendation is that if you have a gate that is particularly large or is also doesn't conform to the typical gate shape. For instance, one of the requirements is that we have a span, a member across the whole width of the gate to ensure that there's structural stability. But some gates, for aesthetic reasons, they prefer to exclude that. Now, it can be done, but it needs to be properly designed. And this is where we would recommend that if you have someone has either a gate that is going to be larger, heavier than the typical gate, both in terms of the maybe fully steel, the height close to the 50 feet limit, or has a particular gate shape and profile that would be not following the guidelines of the standard, that you get expert engineering advice as to how to ensure that the gate stability and rigidity is maintained, one, but also that you have the proper foundation to ensure the supports for the gate track, the supports, and the safety post.
Thank you, Darrell. Do you want to go through the key elements? And there's some additional questions in the chat. And I just wanted to read out a very important one that was raised by Mr. Khan. And he said, to add to those guidelines, there should be more careful attention to the guides, safety pin in case of the replacement of guides, catching, closing, and height of the guides. And Darrell, before you respond, I would like to indicate that one of the objectives that we would like from this session is that we would like to reconvene our specification committee to review the standard that we have now. So standard it was done in 2017, and we typically use a 3 to 5 year cycle to reevaluate the standards and make improvements. So we would also be engaging in a process where we'd like to make some updates and maybe relook at some of the safety considerations, especially in light of some of the very concerning fatalities, to see what else we can include in the standard to help improve these safety features.
Okay, so going through the...
Yes, you can go through these documents.
Three safety features highlighted in the standard. So beginning with the safety, install a safety post, and a lot of this would have been covered by Mr. Bansi's presentation. So the safety post prevents falling or toppling if the gate comes off the track, and there are details of its construction. So the height, the full height of the gate should be at least the height of the horizontal member which spans the entire width of the gate. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the height of the gate, but you need to have a horizontal member that's, or for instance, like a cross brace spanning the entire width of the gate, and the safety post needs to be at least that height. So that's where if the gate were to fall, the safety post will have something to connect with and prevent the gate from falling. The location adjacent to and approximately 6 inches or 150 millimeters on inside of the gate post. And the details, again, these are construction guidelines. At least a 3-inch or 75 millimeter diameter steel pipe or 3x3, 75 square rectangular hollow section cast in a 8x8 or 8-inch diameter foundation, extending at least 16 inches into the ground. So that's the safety post. And again, this is an excerpt from the standard. The standard includes, requirements for the gate leaf, the stop, tracks, the latch, but we've pulled out the requirements that we felt were the most critical for ensure that existing gates and new gates could be operated safely. So the safety stop is the second main point, and safety stop prevents the gates from traveling past a fully open position, which can cause toppling or falling. And the construction details, it should be at least at 1.5 inches or 40 millimeters above the ground level. It should be located at the end of the track where the gate normally stops in its fully open position. And construction details, recommended it's 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter flat steel section cut to fit on the track roof on welding onto the track. And there should also be a supporting back plate to brace the stop. So that in the previous presentation, there was an illustration showing a sort of that triangular profile, which would provide that back brace. And so the last recommendation is not a safety device or feature per se, but it's also important to stress the need for regular maintenance. A gate is a moving part, could be considered a piece of equipment, machinery, and like all machines, it has to be maintained and lubricated and checked for corrosion, ensure it's operating properly. So to ensure that the gate rolls or slides smoothly and can be operated safely, we recommend that the following checks be done regularly. So an important one is to ensure that the track is free of debris, for instance, stones, pieces of wood, metal fragments, etc. Excessive dirt buildup. Unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why sometimes the gate would, as people say, jump as it's especially a manually operated gate, which may not have the torque limiter device I referred to earlier. Sometimes if people encounter an obstacle where they manually open the gate, they use a lot of force. So the gate would, the casters will actually ride over the let's say a small stone or pebble. And because of the force that's applied, it will actually cause the gates to derail from the track. And this is one of the causes of gate derailments. Another important one is ensure that the wheels at the bottom of the gate and the rollers at the top are lubricated and moving smoothly. And again, this has to do with the tendency that if it's not moving smoothly for the operator to use excessive force, which can subsequently or ultimately result in derailment. It's important for on the safety elements, such as the safety stop, the brackets, and safety posts to ensure that they have structural integrity and they don't show any signs of cracking or corrosion. And where you have a safety bracket, ensure that the bracket is securely fastened to whatever supporting wall or post.
Darrell, if you finish there, I may just want to make a comment based on on the chart. With respect to the pedestrian gate, it was advised not to have a pedestrian gate within a sliding gate because someone might be going through it and another, if it is remotely controlled, it starts to move. In addition to that, the pedestrian gate will be within the frame of the overall sliding gate. And you may have constraint according to the height of the person, or if the person is carrying something on their head. So it was concluded based on other members of the committee that it is highly advisable not to have a pedestrian gate within a sliding gate. Someone recall who made that comment in the chat. Yeah, I hope I answered that thing. It was advised not to have it. Okay.
Yes, I agree with John Ryan there, that we actually have a requirement, and especially for automated gates, that that pedestrian gate shall not be incorporated into the gate leaf of a sliding gate. Especially where there's, especially in the case of automated gate.
Thank you, Darrell and Mr. Bansi, for the feedback. I just wanted to ask Mr. Khan or Mr. Cruikshank if you all wanted to raise any questions again directly, or if there are any other questions from the participants. You can raise your hand and then we will go in order of any raised hands. So are there any additional questions? So while we give everyone a few minutes, there is a comment from Michael King. When is the next webinar being hosted and how often will this awareness be conducted? So I wanted to inform all the participants that we have started some promotions via a radio campaign. It is on I-95.5, and we will be doing some interview sessions as well. So we're trying to cover all the different forms of media. We have issued some press advertisements so that persons could be aware of the critical safety features, and we're trying to do as much sensitization as possible. One of the considerations, I mentioned that we'd like to reconvene the specification committee to see if any improvements would be needed and how we can add some additional requirements. And what we will do in that case, we will go to a public comment period and we'll do another sensitization. It typically takes maybe around 12 months or so to take a standard like this from beginning to end. And that will be coming up in a couple of months. And we're given consideration to doing quarterly sessions on standards that have a high impact on health, safety, especially where there's a significant amount of issues like the issue of driveway gates, a lot of fatalities, and it is very concerning for the TTBS. We would have ramped up our promotional activities. So this particular recording is available and it would be on TTBS's social media as well. And we are doing those sessions on the radio as well. So those will also be available, and trying to reach as much stakeholders and homeowners as we can. And in parallel, I would have mentioned that we are in discussions with the key ministries and agencies. So, Mr. Bansi, would you like to add any closing remarks? If I'm not seeing any more hands being raised or questions in the chat, I'll move to close off the session in a few minutes. But Ms. Bansi, if you wanted to give any closing remarks, go ahead.
Comments. First of all, thanks to TTBS for inviting me to participate. And for the 50 plus who have attended today's session. My general comment or main comments, you have to look at the risks. You, the household, have to look at the risks which is involved in anything. Gate is just one to mitigate the risks. You have to be proactive. You have to investigate, do your research, know what is right in terms of specifically the gate here, be guided by the standard, use competent persons, and make that cultural shift. You be proactive. We know the law. Do not be on your phone when you're driving. And you don't see it out there. Don't exceed 100 kilometers. We are seeing it there. So even though this standard may move from voluntary to mandatory, it will still have individuals who are violating it. In the absence of that, make that cultural shift and you be proactive to safeguard life and asset. Thanks, that's my 2 cents there.
Thank you, Mr. Bansi, for that contribution. Daryl, would you like to give some closing remarks?
So I'd like to thank everyone who participated in today's session and the very useful feedback, interesting questions and important feedback. And I agree with Mr. Bansi that we ultimately need to protect ourselves and our family. So the guidelines are available in a summarized form from the TTBS website. And I think we've written in a way that it could be easily understood by the layperson. So I would highly, strongly encourage you to when you go home, to take a look at the gate, make sure that it has the safety features. But even where the safety features are there, to give it a shake, make sure it's rigid, could handle, but you're shaking it and moving it around, and it's not flimsy, because ultimately these things can save a life. As Denita mentioned, TTBS will be continuing its discussions with the relevant government agencies to see how we could push the adoption and enforcement of the standard and these requirements. So thanks again for your participation.
I just say, Darrell, there's any advice, the wheels are not exposed, which makes lubricating difficult. If it is a seal bearing they use inside there, it is self-lubricating. So you have to inspect that there, KFH, right? You have to inspect it. Now, if you said the wheels are not exposed, then you have to really do some inspection of it, but again, get competent person. You have to raise it because the wheel should be able to replace. So inspect it, disassemble it, and look at it. If it is a seal bearing, you can replace the bearing. Well, get the technician to replace it. If not, you will have to apply some grease. So I will suggest, because it is in an open environment, you use a seal bearing. Okay, back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bansi, and thank you to all the participants for today's session. I'm just going to share my screen for one bit. So I wanted to highlight that we have a number of construction standards, and TTBS is very concerned with ensuring health, safety, and environmental protection. So we have right now some construction standards bundle. Our information related to standards is available from the TTBS's website. And where we have such a high degree of public concern on particular matters, we have revamped our marketing and communication activities around those issues. So this matter concerns us so greatly that we would be on a radio program actually this afternoon and over the rest of the month of August to raise the level of public awareness to ensure that the homeowners and the everyday person could be empowered with the information. Now, our standards, some of them are available for sale, but what we have done for the driveway gates is that we have made the most salient information available publicly so that anyone can utilize the information. So I encourage you to take a look at our standards web store. So it is accessible via our website, and take a look at, our small building guide as well, which really has a lot of important safety requirements when designing and building a home. And it's very important that we try to mitigate against the risk of hurricanes, earthquakes, etc. The issue of a national building code is one that is very important for us. It is a significant project, and we're having the relevant discussions with the key ministries and agencies on that matter. As TTBS, though, we have developed a number of compulsory standards that cover construction products as well. And this is where we have a direct regulatory role. So for example, you'll see one here in concrete masonry units. What we have done for our compulsory standards is that those standards are freely available. So I encourage everyone to take a look at our web store and look at our compulsory standards. The more recent ones you can download and take a look at. We have standards for roofing sheets or concrete masonry units. We're also doing a standard on ready mix concrete. So we're trying to address at the product level, the products that represent a significant degree of risk. So we want to ensure that we perform our regulatory functions and ensure the quality and the safety of those products. And we require a lot more collaboration on the building code issues. So that is an ongoing discussion. So I'd like to thank everyone for their active participation today. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session. But more importantly, we'd like you to take a look at our standards and see how you can utilize them to improve the overall safety of your homes, ensure that your loved ones are not affected negatively by any building or gate related issues. And as Mr. Vance indicated, we do have a level of responsibility to empower ourselves. So we're trying to make the information available when you're constructing or requesting a gate being fabricated. You know what to look for and you know what to ask for. I'd like to thank Mr. Rick Book from the Consumer Affairs Division for presenting that handyman's contract. And we know that in Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of the construction is informal, but tools like those contracts would really help the homeowners when they're making a significant investment in a home to protect themselves, and linking it to standards is one of the key ways that it could be used. So that was a very important aspect that, we'd just like to bring to your attention. There are things that we can do. The Consumer Affairs Division does have a direct role in ensuring consumer protection, awareness, empowerment. And we also have a responsibility to ourselves and to our loved ones and family members, etc., to make sure that we utilize the relevant tools. So contract documents, we have a lot of informal relationships with small contractors, and there is a role that standards can play to strengthen those systems and ensure that we get value for money, that we protect life and property. And I'd like to thank in particular Mr. Bansi. He would have chaired the committee for the driveway gates. and he has done a lot of work in terms of helping promote the use of these standards. Not everything we would have put out can be compulsory, because we need to create a standards conscious society. And we have worked actively with the University of the West Indies. So they provided the chairmanship of this committee, and we'd like to continue that activity in terms of what we can do to improve the safety requirements. So please take note of when we send out our public comment notices and provide feedback. And I'd like to thank Daryl, who was directly responsible for the development of the standards project. And he has worked on a number of construction standards, and driveway gates is one of the more challenging issues, because the number of fatalities has really risen in the last few years. It is really something that we are paying attention to. And while we encourage stakeholders to use standards, we also recognize that there's a role for some regulations, and we'll be pursuing that matter as TTBS to determine what mechanisms can be put in place. So on that note, thank you again for all your time and attention. The session was recorded, so it is available on our YouTube. So we encourage everyone to take a look at it. And on behalf of TTBS, our management team and our board, I thank everyone for your time and attention, and really being interested in learning more about the standards and helping TTBS and our Ministry of Trade and Industry in terms of creating what we call a quality conscious society. And a key part of that is being willing to use standards, as I indicated, in your everyday life. And this one has a direct impact on everyone's safety. So thank you for your participation. We will be in touch. Please visit our website for any updates on public comment drafts that are available for review. We really value your input, and we try to take into account all the relevant points. So based on today's session, we have taken note of some of the very serious issues being raised, from the issue of the pedestrian gates to the issue of regulations, and we will be doing our part as TTBS to sensitize the overall general public as to the role of standards and highlight the critical elements. So on behalf of TTBS, thank you. I'd like to thank our entire panel and all the participants and our internal standardization team for their support today. So we will look to close the session shortly, and please contact us if you need any further information. So Daryl, myself, Mr. Bansi, Mr. Risbrook, we're all available if you have any comments. So thank you.